Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to make the case about profile. What profile is, how that affects ship combat, movement, and the future of the game. If you think armor, engineering, or other mechanics like this are going to make a significant impact for multi-crew functionality and effectiveness, you would be mistaken. There is a fundamental, and I say this in all sincerity, a fundamental flaw with the design language that CIG is using, and we are here to address that problem. I have explained this on stream many times, but I wanted to use this video to illustrate very specifically what is going on and help show reasons why this is a huge issue. On top of that, I want to give solutions to how to move forward so that we have a better future for multi-crew ships and for fighters. The first thing we need to understand about anything when it comes to 6 degrees of freedom, which means space combat, is the size of the ship determines the distance. I know some of this stuff may seem dry, but just bear with me. First thing I'd like to say is to establish why this matters, is because if the smaller ships are always able to dictate ranges, control distances, and fighting opportunities, it essentially creates an issue where anything larger than, let's say, a Hornet essentially becomes part of a different tier of combat ship. If ships like Vanguards, Freelancers, Constellations, and Corsairs cannot maintain distance or even get close enough to apply any damage to a target, we create an issue where multi-crew ships essentially are unable to compete in any combat space regardless of their tuning. And that's the difference here, regardless of their tuning. Tuning means how many hit points they have, how much power plant power they have, how many shields, etc., etc. The problem is, geometrically, they are unable to engage and apply damage, which means it doesn't matter how many hit points they have. They will simply be unable to apply damage to someone who is attacking them. In order to understand this problem, we have to realize what the physical size of your ship has to do with the G-forces that ship can produce. So, what this means is that if you look on the left side, the Fury at 10 Gs, in 1 second will move the length of that yellow line. A Corsair at 10 Gs per second will also move the length of that yellow line. The problem is the length crossed by the Corsair large enough to make the profile of the ship avoid incoming fire from hostile sources? If we were to imagine that the red triangle represents a hostile ship, you'll notice that at 90 degrees deflection, the distance traveled at the shooter's range is not great enough to offset the physical size of the ship, except for the Hornet, the Fury, and the Arrow. This simple geometric issue has everything to do with weapon velocities, ranges, and how that relates to the size of the ship. Because StarCitizen has dedicated the rule of cool to the design language for their ships, they have failed to understand how that relates in the global tactical battle space and why some ships are so much more effective in combat simply based off of the design and physical size of their ship. If we take a look at this example here, we'll notice that this Arrow is engaging a hostile constellation at 1800 meters. You'll notice that the constellation, even though under its full power of acceleration, is only able to move the length of that pipper within 1 second, which means if I'm using laser repeaters at 1800 meters per second, which is their current velocity, that means that in 1 second, the Connie at 1800 meters is unable to get out of the way from hostile incoming fire, which puts my maximum or minimum engage range from a fighter at 1800 meters. If we flip this around and we look at the minimum engage distance for the Arrow, you'll notice that even if the Constellation was using 1800 meter per second weapons. It means that the deflection at 1800 meters is larger than the width of the ship, which means the shots would miss their target, which means you would only be able to apply damage to an arrow if you reduced the distance to the target, in this case 600 meters. What this does is it creates an asymmetry of engage and disengage. Anything inside the yellow area for the arrow is where it can fire and not receive damage while engaging the Constellation. Anything with inside the red zone is where the arrow could potentially be taking damage from the enemy Constellation. So that means that as long as I'm outside and I'm standing in my yellow zone and I'm not too far away that my lasers are out of range, the zone in which I can engage and he can engage will be asymmetrically different. So as long as you stay inside the yellow zone, you can engage and never take damage. To illustrate this point in-game in real time, let's look at an example of 2 Furies versus a fully crewed Hammerhead in 324.2. Remember, the Aegis Hammerhead is designed specifically to take on and engage fighter groups. The Fury is the extreme example of the smallest, most nimble of the fighters, which also means that it should be the easiest to kill. But as we can see in this example, we are not shooting at an NPC Hammerhead. This is a fully crewed with human players Hammerhead looking for kills. What you need to understand about anything in StarCitizen at the moment is Master Modes wants to make combat closer. But with the ratio and the way the tuning and the way the whole game is designed, you simply cannot apply damage with the way that they've structured their weapons. It's not so much the flight model itself that is so, I guess you could say, damning. It's the relationship between the velocity of the projectiles, the sizes of the ships, and the way they have their gunnery systems set up. Even at 600 meters minimum range, I'm able to backstrafe, do a little bit of roll, and immediately I'm able to shake off incoming damage. So in this situation, if it was reversed, it would be the same outcome. If we had arrows versus the Hammerhead, it would be the same outcome. If we had Hornets versus the Hammerhead, it would be the same outcome. If we had any ship smaller than the size of the Hammerhead with slightly higher G-forces, we could do exactly what we're doing here, except for in that ship. There's an argument with StarCitizen right now that I see in many places that armor will fix the game. But the reality is armor cannot fix this problem. It does not matter if you make size 2 guns relatively ineffective against Hammerheads. Because you can do this strategy in Gladiators with size 4 main guns. You can do this strategy in Ares Ions. You can do this strategy in Mark II Hornets with 2 size 2s and 4 size 3s. So unless you make all fighters, medium to heavy, essentially completely ineffective against multi-crew larger vessels, we are going to run into this asymmetrical problem because we don't have hit scan weapons. All weapons take time to reach their target. This is known across all navies and across multiple different disciplines within modern combat forces in today's world. Hypersonic missiles are a thing of the future because the higher the velocity, the easier it is to apply damage. The slower you are, the easier you are to hit. It's just that simple. And with Master Modes, what they've done is they've compressed the speed ceilings. In the previous flight model, Hammerheads could reach speeds up to 1200, so could fighters, which means that the acceleration was the most determining factor whether or not you're able to get in position and apply damage. But now, top speeds on most multi-crew ships are half that of fighters, and accelerations doubly so. Which means that with accelerations being extremely high on fighters, or basically any single sea experience, against a multi-crew, the multi-crew has almost zero options in a fight. If they choose to stand in trade, as soon as the fighter receives any meaningful damage, it simply leaves the fight like you just saw there. And even at minimum range, it's still quite difficult to apply damage to these small ships. If I decide to become aggressive in the Hammerhead and push myself against other enemy fighters, the fighters just simply move away from me and I'm left chasing my tail, not applying any real damage. So if armor was in the game, it wouldn't be a question of I can just sit there tanking. It would mostly be a question of it takes us 7 minutes to kill a Hammerhead with 2 Furies. It would most likely mean that it would take us 18 minutes to kill a Hammerhead. But in the persistent universe where death is on the line, and things matter when we lose them, a few more minutes of target time isn't going to mean a whole lot to a group of fighters, considering this was only 2 Furies. So my question to everybody is, if this problem hasn't changed since the inception of StarCitizen, since 2014, this geometric problem has not been solved by any flight model, are we really sure that CIG moving forward is going to address this problem unless we, the fans, demand some kind of action? And that the future of StarCitizen, to get new players and new energy and new life pumped into the experience, we have to make multi-crewing our friends and our friends' ships the best experience it can be. But when faced against 2 small fighters, not a single multi-crew ship in the game can defend itself. We're left with a very sad and very heartbreaking possibility that StarCitizen's multi-crew experience will be the biggest blunder this game has ever seen. But not all hope is lost. There is a solution to this, which I'm going to give you right now. If CIG implements these strategies, we have a very good chance at making StarCitizen a much better experience moving forward. And hopefully we'll get some much needed adjustments and updates to the flight model so that we can have a great experience for the next 20 years. So let's take a look at this solution. To keep it simple, we're going to use the current velocity metrics that we saw from the beginning of the video. In this situation here, obviously, we just witnessed 2 Furies engaging a multi-crew Hammerhead and existing 99% of the time in that fight in what's known as the yellow band. However, we can change this by changing the fact that all systems will no longer have the same velocity. Panthers on a constellation should not be the same velocity as Panthers on an arrow. What we need to do is change the ranges in which how long the projectile is alive for, and also adjust the velocities for multi-crew and smaller ships to offset, and I say again, to offset the design flaws with the physical size of the ship to allow for a mutual combat zone. There are many ways to achieve this, but what we want to do is allow for range asymmetry based on either the size of the power plant, the physical size of the ship, or individually tuned for each individual ship. What we would want to get to is a place where velocity is the most important metric when it comes to applying damage. But we also don't want to create a space where fighters, as soon as they're within weapons range, are essentially nuked out of existence. This is largely due to the fact that turret gameplay has auto-aim after assist, after assist, after assist, which essentially takes almost all of the power out of the player's hands to make an effective choice in a dogfight. When you're turreting on a multi-crew ship, there are so many assists, fixed assists, gimbal assists, that it almost feels like you're not even really aiming yourself at all. So we want to empower the person or the player who is in the turret seat to have a meaningful impact on a fight, but also not be handheld and guided and basically stripped from their agency so that their skill as a turret gunner can't come through in a fight. I know this was a long video, but it's important for me to illustrate what's been going on these last couple of years. I know I sometimes bring it up on stream a lot, but I wanted to have a video to reference, and so that if you see anybody on Spectrum complaining or arguing that engineering will solve the problems, that armor will solve the problems, until we get some very clear clarification on how CIG is going to tackle this fundamental issue with their flight model, we will be living in a world where fighters will be the only viable option as time goes on. I, for one, would like to see StarCitizen get to a place where multi-crew ships are in a great spot. They become exciting and fun for the majority of the players in the game, and perhaps maybe where most new players start off with. They get onto their friend's constellation, you have one experienced pilot and 3 or 4 other folks flying together, working together, and having some legitimate success even against trained pilots. We have a very bright future with StarCitizen, but we have to pull together and we have to demand that CIG address these issues, because when Pyro comes out and everybody starts to suffer from the small groups of fighters going around, it's going to be back to square one. And we don't want to see the community slip into nihilism and frustration because of something that CIG seems to just either forget every patch or maybe not have the solutions or understanding how to fix this problem. The answers are there as clear as day. Whether CIG actually picks those answers up and works with them is up to them. But they cannot say that they didn't have the solution. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you out at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for stream. My name was Avenger1, and I'll see you next time.